The sterile quiet of the penthouse office was a universe unto itself, a hermetically sealed bubble of polished chrome, black marble, and glass that offered a god's-eye view of the sprawling city below. Julian Thorne stood before the floor-to-ceiling window, not seeing the view but the reflection of the man it contained. A figure encased in a tailored suit of charcoal gray, so dark it was nearly black, his posture immaculate, his short, dark brown hair perfectly coiffed. The silence was his sanctuary, a necessary buffer against a world that always wanted something. It was broken only by the whisper-quiet hum of the climate control and the soft, almost imperceptible chime of his private elevator. He didn't turn. Only one person had access to that elevator, his executive assistant, Maria, a woman whose efficiency was matched only by her ability to be unobtrusive. He expected her to place a folder on his desk, murmur a brief update, and vanish. Instead, he heard two sets of footsteps. One was Maria's familiar, respectful heel click. The other was a soft, shuffling sound, small and uncertain. Julian finally turned, his brow furrowing with irritation at this breach of protocol. Maria stood by his monolithic obsidian desk, her face an unreadable mask of professional panic. And beside her, holding her hand, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7, with skin as fair as milk and a cascade of neat blonde hair that fell to her shoulders. She was wearing a simple, clean, but clearly well-worn pink dress. Her eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue, were fixed on him, wide with a solemnity that did not belong on a child's face. Julian's gaze flickered to Maria, a silent, cold question in his eyes. Maria swallowed, her composure cracking just a little. "Mr. Thorne, I am so sorry. She insisted. She bypassed security on the ground floor. I don't know how." Julian's attention returned to the child. She had let go of Maria's hand and taken a single step forward, a tiny figure in the vast, intimidating space. Her chin was lifted, her small shoulders squared as if bracing for impact. He opened his mouth to deliver a curt dismissal, to have this bewildering interruption removed. But the little girl spoke first, her voice clear and steady, echoing unnervingly in the acoustic perfection of the room. "Mr. Thorne?" she asked, though it wasn't a question. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. The little girl clutched a small, tarnished object in her fist, holding it out as if it were an offering. "My name is Lily," she said, her voice unwavering. "Your wife sent me." The words struck Julian with the force of a physical blow. The air solidified in his lungs. The city below vanished. The meticulously constructed silence of his office was shattered, replaced by a roaring vacuum. His wife, Alara, had been dead for 2 years. The child, Lily, remained perfectly still, her small hand outstretched, her expression one of grave importance. Julian's mind, usually a seamless engine of logic and calculation, fractured. He stared at her, at the impossible statement hanging in the air between them. It was a prank. A cruel, tasteless, elaborate prank. Or worse, a shakedown. Some new, despicable angle for a lawsuit. He could feel the familiar coldness coiling in his gut, the defensive shield that had served him so well in the boardroom and in the desolate landscape of his life since Alara's death. "That's not possible," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rasp. He was surprised at how raw it sounded. Maria, sensing the precipice, stepped forward. "Mr. Thorne, I'll have security handle this. I am so terribly sorry for the intrusion." The little girl's gaze didn't waver from Julian. She didn't seem to hear Maria. "She told me to find you," Lily insisted, her voice quieter now, a hint of a childish tremble entering it. "She said you would help. She said to show you this." She uncurled her fingers. Resting in her small, pale palm was a heart-shaped locket, made of old silver, tarnished with age and wear. It was simple, unadorned, a thing of sentiment, not value. It meant nothing. And yet a flicker of something, a ghost of a memory, stirred in the recesses of his mind. He dismissed it instantly. "Security, Maria," he repeated, turning his back on them both, facing the window once more. He would not engage with this absurdity. He would not allow the meticulously ordered fortress of his grief to be breached by this child armed with a lie and a trinket. He heard Maria's gentle but firm voice, the soft shuffling footsteps receding, the final, merciful chime of the elevator. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was heavier, poisoned. The ghost of the girl's words remained, an obscene graffiti on the pristine walls of his solitude. "Your wife sent me." He stood there for a long time, the reflection in the glass a stranger in a ridiculously expensive suit. He saw the flicker of gray at his temples that had appeared in the last 2 years, the hard lines etched around his mouth. Alara had hated those lines. She used to trace them with her finger, trying to smooth them away, telling him he was carrying the weight of a world that didn't need a martyr. He had built an empire, Thorn Industries, from the ground up. It was a monolith of technology and logistics, a testament to his ambition, his intellect, his relentless drive. In the beginning, she had been his partner in that climb, her warmth and belief a fuel he hadn't even realized he needed. But as the empire grew, so did the distance between them. His world became boardrooms and stock prices, a sterile landscape of numbers and projections. Her world had remained one of feeling. Art galleries he no longer had time for, charity galas he attended out of obligation, obscure poetry books she'd leave on his nightstand that he never opened. The car crash had been sudden, brutal, senseless. A rainy night, a slick road, a drunk driver. The police report was clinical. The funeral had been a blur of faces, a sea of condolences that felt like stones being thrown at him. He had dealt with it the only way he knew how. He had worked. He had built higher walls, made the office more impregnable, filled every waking moment with acquisitions, mergers, and strategic planning. Grief was a variable he could not control, so he had locked it in a vault and refused to acknowledge its existence. But the little girl. Her words had picked the lock. Later that evening, unable to focus on the quarterly reports glowing on his screen, he found himself pulling up the security footage. He watched the scene in his office unfold in silent, clinical gray tones. He saw himself, cold and rigid. He saw Maria, flustered. And he saw the girl, a tiny, defiant figure. He zoomed in on her hand as she opened it, the locket. It was frustratingly low resolution, a mere smudge of silver. But the shape, the simple, unadorned heart shape, pricked at his memory again. It was a cheap thing he had bought her on their first anniversary, long before the billions, before the penthouse, before the world knew his name. They had been in a small seaside town, walking through a street fair. She'd seen it in a dusty little stall, and her eyes had lit up. He'd bought it for $5. She had worn it for years, a secret little talisman against her skin, until the clasp broke. He'd offered to buy her a replacement, a diamond-encrusted monstrosity from Tiffany's. She had refused. She had wanted that specific one, the $5 one. It had been repaired, but then, a few years before she died, it had vanished. They had searched the house, but it was gone. Alara had been strangely heartbroken over it, a depth of sadness he hadn't understood for something so insignificant. He'd assumed it was lost forever. To see it again, or something that looked so much like it, in the hand of a strange child spouting impossible claims. It was a loose thread. And Julian Thorne did not tolerate loose threads. The next morning, he bypassed Maria and went directly to his head of security, a formidable ex-Mossad agent named Gabriel. He placed a still from the video on Gabriel's desk. "Find her," Julian said, his voice flat. "I want to know who she is, where she lives, who her parents are. I want to know everything, and I want to know where she got this." He pointed to the locket. Discreetly. Gabriel nodded, his eyes not leaving the image. "Consider it done." The next 48 hours were a study in controlled impatience. Julian moved through his meetings, his conference calls, his strategic sessions like an automaton. His mind was a split screen. On one side, the complex machinations of his global enterprise. On the other, the image of a small blonde girl and a tarnished silver heart. He found himself staring out the window, not at the metrics of his success, but down at the tangled streets of the city's underbelly, the parts he flew over in his helicopter but never touched. He wondered which shadowed alleyway, which forgotten tenement she had emerged from. Gabriel's report arrived in a sealed, unmarked folder. Julian dismissed Maria for the day, locked his office door, and sat down at his desk. The file was thin, but dense with information. The girl's name was Lillian, or Lily, Carter. Age 7, no father on record. Mother, deceased. Overdose. She lived with her maternal grandmother, Sarah Carter, age 68. Their address was in the Warren, a neighborhood so blighted and forgotten it was more a rumor than a part of the city to men like him. It was a place of crumbling brick, shuttered factories, and pervasive poverty. The report detailed Sarah Carter's meager Social Security income, their overdue rent, a recent visit to a free clinic. There was a grainy surveillance photo of Lily and her grandmother leaving a soup kitchen called The Haven. But it was the final page that made Julian's blood run cold. Attached was a list of Ilara's credit card statements from the last year of her life. He had never looked at them. His business manager handled all personal finances. He had just assumed they were filled with charges from designer boutiques and high-end spas. But they weren't. There were small, regular cash withdrawals from an ATM near the Warren, dozens of purchases from a small art supply store in the same neighborhood, and a recurring monthly donation, a significant one, to a small, independent charity. The charity that ran the Haven Soup Kitchen, a place Ilara had never mentioned. A part of the city she had no reason to ever visit. A secret life, hidden in plain sight, in the columns of a credit card statement he had never bothered to read. He felt a wave of dizziness, a profound sense of dislocation, as if the floor of his perfectly engineered world had just dropped away. Gabriel had found no record of how Lily acquired the locket. The trail went cold. Julian knew then that a discreet investigation was no longer enough. He had to go there. He had to see it for himself. He had to stand in front of the child and her grandmother and look them in the eye. He had to know the truth, even if the truth was a thing that could gut him completely. He drove himself. He took one of his less conspicuous cars, a sleek black sedan that was still so out of place in the Warren that it drew stares from every corner. The streets grew narrower, more cracked. The gleaming skyscrapers of his world were replaced by squat, soot-stained buildings, their windows like vacant eyes. Graffiti bloomed on every surface, vibrant and angry. He found the address. It was a tenement building that looked as though it were held together by sheer force of will and grime. The front door was unlocked, hanging slightly ajar. The air in the hallway was thick with the smell of damp, dust, and boiled cabbage. He climbed 4 flights of stairs, the wood groaning under his expensive leather shoes. He found apartment 4B. The paint on the door was peeling, the number faded. He could hear a faint sound from within, a television murmuring. He raised his hand to knock, and for the first time in a decade, he hesitated. What was he doing here? What did he expect to find? A confirmation of a scam? An explanation that would allow him to put this anomaly back in its box and return to his ordered life? He knocked. The sound was loud and intrusive in the quiet hallway. The television sound cut off. He heard shuffling, the click of a lock. The door opened a few inches, held by a brass chain. An elderly woman's face appeared in the gap. Her hair was a cloud of gray, her face a road map of worry and weariness. Her eyes, the same clear blue as the girl's, were narrowed with suspicion. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice raspy. "I'm Julian Thorne," he said. Recognition, and something else, fear, flashed in her eyes. "I need to speak with you, about your granddaughter." The door closed. He heard the chain being fumbled, then the door swung open. Sarah Carter stood there, wrapping a threadbare cardigan around herself like armor. The apartment behind her was small, impossibly cluttered, but spotlessly clean. Every surface was covered in drawings, colorful, vibrant, imaginative drawings of fantastical creatures and impossible landscapes. They were drawn on paper, on napkins, on the backs of envelopes. They were the only splash of color in the drab beige room, and in the center of it all, sitting on a worn-out armchair, was Lily. She was holding a sketchbook and a set of professional-grade charcoal pencils. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "I told you he'd come, Grandma," she said, her voice soft. Sarah Carter ignored her, her gaze fixed on Julian. "You have no right to be here," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "We haven't done anything wrong." "I'm not here to accuse you of anything," Julian said, his voice softer than he intended. He stepped inside, the door closing behind him, shutting out the grim hallway. He felt like an invader, his suit, his shoes, his very presence an obscenity in this small, proud space. "I just want to understand. The locket. Where did you get it?" Sarah's lips thinned into a hard line. "That's none of your business." "It is my business," Julian insisted, taking a step closer. "That locket belonged to my wife." "Your wife gave it to her," Sarah snapped, gesturing towards Lily. "She gave it to Lily with her own 2 hands." Julian looked at the little girl. She had set her sketchbook aside and was now clutching the silver heart, holding it up for him to see. "Her name was Ellie," Lily said quietly. "She was my friend." Ellie, not Ilara. A different name, a different identity. A woman who volunteered at a soup kitchen and befriended a little girl and her grandmother. A woman who bought art supplies and gave away sentimental trinkets. A woman he hadn't known at all. "I don't believe you," he said, but the words lacked conviction. He was looking at the locket, really looking at it this time. It was identical to the one he remembered. The same simple shape, the same delicate chain. "Please," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Let me see it." Lily hesitated, looking to her grandmother for permission. Sarah Carter watched Julian for a long moment, her hard gaze seeming to search for something in his face. Finally, she gave a slow, reluctant nod. Lily slipped out of the chair and walked towards him, her small hand once again outstretched. Her fingers were smudged with charcoal. She placed the locket in his hand. It was warm from her touch. The metal was light, almost weightless. He turned it over and over, his thumb tracing the familiar, smooth curve of the heart. And then he saw it. Something he had forgotten. Something so small it was almost invisible. On the back, near the clasp, was a tiny, almost microscopic scratch. He had made it himself, accidentally, with the edge of a key, the day after he'd given it to her. It was a flaw, an imperfection that had annoyed him at the time. Now it was an irrefutable truth. This was Ilara's locket. He felt his breath catch in his throat. His carefully constructed composure was crumbling. She said there was a secret," Lily whispered, looking up at him, her blue eyes searching his. "She told me how to open it. You have to press here." She reached out a tiny, charcoal-dusted finger and pressed a specific spot on the side of the locket. A spot that wasn't a button, that looked just like any other part of the seam. There was a faint click, and the heart sprang open. Julian stared down at the open locket in his palm, his heart hammering against his ribs. He hadn't known it could open. He had bought it for $5 from a street fair. It was a cheap piece of tin. It shouldn't have had a secret compartment. On one side was a tiny, faded photograph of a much younger him and Alara, smiling on the beach, their hair wild with the sea wind. He remembered that day. He hadn't seen the photo in 20 years, but it was the other side that stole the air from his lungs. It wasn't a photo. It was a tiny, impossibly intricate engraving in the silver, the letters so small they were barely legible. 4 words: Amor vincit omnia. Love conquers all. It was the inscription on the inside of their wedding rings, their secret motto, the promise they had whispered to each other on their wedding day, a phrase they had never spoken to another soul. This child, this stranger, knew their secret. The foundation of his reality dissolved into dust. He looked from the impossible inscription in his hand to the face of the little girl, and he finally understood. It wasn't a lie. It wasn't a scam. It was something far more terrifying and far more profound. It was a message from a world he thought had been sealed forever, delivered by a small, charcoal-dusted angel into the sterile wasteland of his life. He sank to his knees, not caring about the creasing of his $1,000 trousers on the worn linoleum floor, until he was eye level with the child. The towering billionaire, the titan of industry, was gone. In his place was just a man, stripped bare, his grief a raw and gaping wound. He looked into Lily's eyes, and for the first time in 2 years he felt something other than the crushing weight of absence. He felt a flicker of impossible hope. "Tell me," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Tell me everything about Ellie." Sarah Carter made tea. It was a simple, grounding ritual in the face of the seismic event that had just occurred in her living room. She moved about the tiny, cramped kitchen with a practiced economy of motion, her initial hostility towards Julian replaced by a weary, cautious acceptance. She had seen the look on his face when the locket opened. It was a look she recognized. The raw, unmasked face of grief, a beast she knew intimately. Julian remained on the floor for a long moment, the open locket resting in his palm like a sacred relic. Lily sat back in her armchair, watching him with a child's quiet curiosity, as if she were observing a strange, fascinating beetle. He finally rose, his knees aching, and sat on the edge of the lumpy sofa, the springs groaning in protest. He felt like a giant in a doll's house. Every object in the room seemed to scream of a life lived on the margins, a life of making do, of quiet, desperate resilience. And somehow, his Alara, his beautiful, cosseted Alara, had been a part of this world. Sarah returned with 2 chipped mugs of steaming tea, placing one on the cluttered coffee table in front of him. She sat opposite him in a rickety wooden chair, the silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. It was Sarah who broke it. She started coming to the Haven about a year before. "Before she passed," she began, her voice low and raspy. "At first none of us knew who she was. She just showed up one afternoon, asking if she could help serve the meal. She was dressed simply. No makeup, her hair tied back. She called herself Ellie. She never talked about her family or where she lived. She just listened. People would tell her their stories, their troubles, and she would just listen with this incredible stillness. She made people feel seen." Julian clutched the locket in his fist, the edges digging into his skin. He tried to picture it. Alara, in his favorite of her cashmere sweaters, her hands, which were more accustomed to holding champagne flutes, now ladling stew into plastic bowls. The image wouldn't coalesce. It felt like a scene from a movie about someone else's wife. Lily was having a hard time back then, Sarah continued, her gaze softening as she looked at her granddaughter. She was being quiet in school, not making friends. Her mother, well, her mother was gone, and Lily had just shut down. She wouldn't draw anymore, and that child has been drawing since she could hold a crayon. Lily looked up from her sketchbook. Ellie liked my drawings, she said softly. She said I had a special way of seeing things. She said the world needed my colors. Sarah smiled, a faint, sad upturn of her lips. She did. Ellie would sit with her for hours while I was working my shift cleaning offices. She'd bring paper, real art paper, not just scraps, and pencils, paints. She told Lily stories about great artists, about how they saw the world not just as it was, but as it could be. She brought the color back into my little girl's life. The art supplies, the purchases from the store near the Warren. It all clicked into place, each transaction a breadcrumb leading to this cramped, cluttered room. "Why didn't she tell me?" Julian whispered, the question directed at the room, at the ghost of his wife. Why did she keep all of this a secret? Sarah took a slow sip of her tea, her gaze shrewd. "Maybe," she said, her voice devoid of judgment, "because this was hers. Maybe this was a place where she wasn't Mrs. Julian Thorne, wife of the billionaire. A place where she was just Ellie, a woman who listened and helped. Maybe she needed that." The words were a quiet indictment, and they landed with surgical precision. He had given Alara a world of unimaginable luxury, a life without limits. He could buy her anything she wanted: islands, jewels, masterpieces of art. But he had failed to give her the one thing she'd evidently craved: a world where she could be anonymous, where her value wasn't tied to his name, his wealth, his empire. He had been so consumed with building their gilded cage that he hadn't noticed she was desperate to fly out of it, even for just a few hours a week. "The locket," he said, needing to change the subject, needing to ground himself in the tangible. "When did she give it to Lily?" "About a week before the accident," Sarah said, her eyes clouding over. "She came by and she seemed different, sad, worried about something. She gave the locket to Lily, and she made her promise to take good care of it. She said it was very special. And she said—" Sarah paused, looking at Julian, her expression pained. "She said, 'If you're ever in real trouble, the kind of trouble your grandma can't fix, I want you to go to my husband. His name is Julian Thorne. You show him this locket. You tell him Ellie sent you. He's a good man. Under all the noise, he'll help.' We didn't think anything of it. Then, a week later, we saw her picture on the news. The silence that followed was profound. Julian could hear the faint traffic sounds from the street below, the hum of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. He felt as if he were underwater, the pressure of his unknown past pressing in on him. He had spent 2 years mourning the woman he thought he knew, the wife who graced the society pages and organized flawless dinner parties. But the real woman, the woman who had spent her last days worrying about a little girl in a tenement, was a stranger. And his grief, he realized with a sickening lurch, was a pale, inadequate thing. He had been mourning a photograph, a memory. The living, breathing, secret-keeping woman had been lost to him long before the crash. He looked around the room again, at the dozens of vibrant drawings taped to the walls. He saw now what he hadn't before. They were good. More than good. They were alive, bursting with a raw, untutored talent. There was a drawing of a lion with a mane made of swirling galaxies, a tree whose roots held up the earth, a cityscape where the buildings were made of musical notes. He saw the world through Lily's eyes, a world infused with the magic Ellie had nurtured. This was Ilara's legacy. Not the hospital wing with her name on it, not the sterile charitable foundation he had set up in her honor, but this little girl, and the fire his wife had refused to let die out. He cleared his throat, the sound loud in the small room. "What kind of trouble?" he asked, his voice steady now, imbued with a purpose he hadn't felt in years. Sarah looked down at her hands, at the swollen knuckles and work-worn skin. "The landlord is selling the building," she said, her voice flat with resignation. "They're turning it into luxury lofts or something. We have to be out by the end of the month, all of us. There's nowhere to go. The shelters are full, and the waiting list for subsidized housing is years long. I don't know what we're going to do." There it was, the real trouble Ilara had foreseen. It was so mundane, so brutally simple, an eviction notice, a problem that for him was the equivalent of a rounding error in a financial statement. For Sarah and Lily, it was an abyss. Lily had picked up her pencils again and was sketching furiously in her book. Julian watched her small, concentrating face. He saw Ilara in the slight furrow of her brow, in the determined set of her small mouth. "Your grandmother said you stopped drawing for a while," he said to her gently. Lily didn't look up. "My hands were sad," she said simply. "Ellie made them happy again." Julian felt a sharp, painful pang in his chest. He stood up. The movement was decisive, final. Sarah and Lily both looked up at him, startled. "Pack your things," he said. The words were not a suggestion, they were a command, but his tone was not harsh. It was the voice he used when a decision had been made, when the path forward was clear. "Pack whatever is important, the drawings, your clothes, whatever you want to keep." Sarah stared at him, bewildered. "What are you talking about? Pack for what? We have nowhere to go." "Yes, you do," Julian said. He looked around the small apartment, at the peeling paint and the worn-out furniture. "You're not staying here another night." He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen, dialing a number he hadn't called in years, the number for the manager of one of his residential properties, a quiet, elegant building, with a doorman and a view of the park. A building that had a fully furnished 3-bedroom guest suite that sat perpetually empty. "My name is Julian Thorne," he said into the phone, his voice resonating with an authority that had humbled corporate giants. "I need the penthouse guest suite prepared immediately. Yes, for long-term guests. No, I don't know how long. Just have it ready in 3 hours. Stock the kitchen. And I need a car sent to this address in 1 hour." He gave the address of the tenement. Sarah was on her feet now, her face pale with shock. "Mr. Thorne, you can't. We can't accept." "You're not accepting charity." Julian cut her off, his gaze firm but kind. "You are accepting my wife's final request. She sent Lily to me for help. This is that help. It's 2 years late, but it's here." He ended the call and looked at Lily. "I'm also told," he said, a faint, unfamiliar smile touching his lips, "that your hands are happy when they're drawing. My wife's art collection is one of the finest in the country, but it's missing something. It's missing color. The kind of color you see." Lily finally looked up at him, her blue eyes wide. A slow, shy smile spread across her face. It was like watching the sun rise. In that moment, Julian Thorne understood. Love doesn't conquer all. Not death, not grief, not the crushing realities of the world. But what it could do, he now realized, was send out echoes. It could leave behind messages in tarnished lockets, in the secret kindnesses of strangers, in the nurtured talent of a child. And if you were lucky, if you were quiet enough to listen, you might just hear them, and they might just be enough to lead you home. The transition from the grimy tenement to the hushed elegance of the Sterling Plaza was a study in cultural whiplash. The car Julian sent was a black town car with tinted windows, driven by a silent man in a crisp suit. Sarah and Lily had packed 2 worn suitcases and a large portfolio case filled with Lily's art. As they drove away from the Warren, Lily pressed her face to the glass, watching her neighborhood recede until it was just another smudge on the horizon. She was quiet, her usual childish chatter subdued by the sheer strangeness of it all. Sarah sat rigidly beside her, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her expression a mixture of awe and terror. She looked as though she expected someone to tap her on the shoulder at any moment and tell her there had been a terrible mistake. Julian met them in the lobby. The doorman, a stoic man named Frank, whom Julian had only ever acknowledged with a curt nod, greeted Sarah and Lily with a warm, genuine smile, taking their bags as if they were royalty. Julian saw the surprise on Frank's face, the flicker of curiosity, but the man's professionalism was absolute. "Welcome to the Sterling, Mrs. Carter, Miss Lily," Frank said, his voice a gentle baritone. Lily, who had been clutching her grandmother's hand, managed a small, shy smile in return. The elevator that whisked them up to the penthouse was a wood-paneled capsule that moved with unnerving silence and speed. When the doors opened directly into the guest suite, Sarah gasped. The apartment was larger than their entire floor in the tenement building. It was a symphony of cream, beige, and soft grays with plush carpets, modern furniture, and one entire wall made of glass, offering a panoramic, glittering view of the city. The same view as Julian's office, but somehow warmer, more inviting. A large kitchen gleamed with unused stainless steel appliances, its marble countertops stocked with groceries. The living room had a fireplace, and the bedrooms had beds that looked like soft white clouds. It was a different planet. This is too much," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "We can't stay here." "Nonsense," Julian said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This place is rarely used. It's better to have it lived in." He turned to Lily, who was standing in the middle of the living room, slowly rotating as she tried to take it all in. "There's a room down the hall," he said, gesturing. "I was told it gets the best morning light. I thought it might make a good studio." He led her to a smaller bedroom, which was empty except for a large wooden easel, a professional drafting table, and several large, unopened boxes. "These are for you," he said. Lily approached the boxes with a reverent caution. Julian knelt and sliced one open with a penknife from his pocket. Inside were packages of artist-grade paper of all textures and sizes, sets of pastels, professional watercolors, acrylics, oils, and a dizzying array of brushes and pencils. It was a treasure chest. Lily reached in and picked up a tube of paint, cerulean blue, the exact shade of her eyes. She held it as if it were a precious jewel. "For me?" she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "All of it?" "All of it," Julian confirmed. "A proper artist needs proper tools." For the second time that day, he saw her smile, and it felt like a physical warmth spreading through his chest. He left them to settle in, retreating to his own penthouse on the floor above. The silence of his apartment, which had once been a comfort, now felt oppressive and empty. He walked through the vast, museum-like rooms, each piece of furniture, each work of art, curated and placed with expensive, impersonal precision. It was a showroom, not a home. He realized with a jolt that he hadn't truly looked at any of it in years. He wandered into Alara's study, a room he had kept locked since her death. He didn't know why he went there now. He just did. He keyed in the code, and the door clicked open. The air inside was stale, still. Everything was exactly as she had left it. Books on art history were stacked on the desk, a fine layer of dust covering them. A dried-up pen lay next to a half-finished crossword puzzle. Her scent, a faint trace of lavender and old paper, still lingered in the air. It was a punch to the gut. He sat down in her leather chair, the seat sighing under his weight. On the wall opposite the desk was a series of framed photographs, a timeline of their life together. The early years were filled with laughter and adventure, hiking in the mountains, silly faces in a photo booth, a stolen kiss under the Eiffel Tower. As the years progressed, the photos became more formal. Gala openings, award ceremonies, christenings of corporate yachts. In the later photos, their smiles were still there, but they were practiced. Perfect. The light had gone out of their eyes. They were posing for a life they were supposed to be living, not the one they actually had. His gaze fell upon her laptop, sitting closed on the corner of the desk. He had never touched it. Her digital life, like her secret life in the Warren, was a territory he had never breached. On impulse, he opened it. It whirred to life, the screen glowing. It was password protected. He tried her birthday. Access denied. He tried their anniversary. Access denied. He tried the name of her childhood pet, the street she grew up on, a dozen other things. Nothing. He was about to give up when his eyes fell on the tarnished locket he had placed on the corner of the desk. He picked it up, the engraving cool against his thumb. Amor vincit omnia. He typed it in. One word, no spaces. The desktop bloomed into view. His breath hitched. It was a photo of Lily, a candid shot. She was sitting at a table at the Haven, her brow furrowed in concentration, as she drew, a splash of sunlight illuminating her blonde hair. It was a photo taken with love. He started clicking through files. He found a folder labeled My Projects. It was filled with documents, grant proposals for the Haven, business plans for a free community arts program for underprivileged children, detailed research on urban blight and renewal. It was a shadow life's work, meticulously documented. She had been building her own, quieter empire, one focused not on profit and loss, but on compassion and creativity. He found her journal, a password-protected document. The password this time was simply Lily. He opened the most recent entry, dated the day before she died. Spoke with Julian tonight. He was excited. A new acquisition in Singapore. He talked for an hour about synergy and leverage. I tried to tell him about the Carter family, about the eviction notices going up all over the Warren, but the moment passed. He looked so tired. I don't want to be another burden, another problem for him to solve. He lives on a different mountain now, and I don't know if he can see the valley anymore. I gave Lily the locket today. It felt right. It felt like an insurance policy, a little beacon of hope. If the worst happens, maybe, just maybe, she can lead him back. Maybe she can show him the world he's forgotten how to see. The words blurred as tears welled in his eyes. It wasn't that he hadn't loved her. It was that he had forgotten how to. He had mistaken providing for her with being present for her. He had confused the grand gestures, the new car, the diamond bracelet, with the small, vital currency of a shared life. He had been living on a different mountain, and from that height, the people in the valley were too small to see. He spent the rest of the night reading. He read about Ilara's frustrations, her hopes, her small victories at the Haven. He learned about the people she'd helped. A single father she'd found a pro bono lawyer for, a teenager she'd encouraged to apply for a scholarship, a family she'd helped furnish an apartment for after a fire. It was a litany of kindnesses he had been completely oblivious to. He had been married to a saint and had been too busy looking at spreadsheets to notice. The next morning he felt hollowed out. But it was a clean emptiness, a space ready to be filled. He went downstairs to the guest suite. The smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the air. He found Sarah in the kitchen, looking more relaxed than he had ever seen her, humming softly as she cooked. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne," she said, a small, genuine smile on her face. "Lily's already in her studio. Has been since dawn." Julian walked down the hall and peered into the room. Lily was on the floor, surrounded by a sea of paper and pastels. She was completely absorbed in her work, her hands and face smudged with a rainbow of colors. The morning light poured in through the window, surrounding her in a golden halo. It was the picture of pure, unadulterated joy. He watched her for a moment, unseen. This, he thought, is where the healing begins. Not just for Lily, but for him. The days that followed settled into a strange new rhythm. Julian started working from his home office, forgoing the trip to the Thorne Industries skyscraper. He would have breakfast with Sarah and Lily. He learned that Lily liked her bacon extra crispy and that Sarah made the best pancakes he had ever tasted. He would take breaks from his work to visit Lily's studio. He didn't offer advice or criticism, he just watched. He learned about her creative process, how she would hum a specific tune when she was drawing her galaxy-maned lions, how she would chew on her lip when she was trying to get the color of a sunset just right. He was learning the language of a 7-year-old girl, a language of wonder and imagination that he had long forgotten. He started to see the city through her eyes. One afternoon, he took her to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He had walked those halls 100 times, usually as a benefactor at a stuffy gala. But with Lily, it was different. She wasn't interested in the monetary value or the historical significance of the paintings. She was interested in the stories. She stood for 20 minutes in front of a giant Jackson Pollock, her head tilted. "It looks like a happy fight," she declared finally. In front of a somber Rembrandt portrait, she whispered, "His eyes are sad. I think he lost something." She saw the emotion, the soul of the work, that he had been blind to. She was teaching him how to see again. He also started to engage with Sarah. He learned about her life, about the husband she'd lost young, about the daughter who had succumbed to the darkness that haunted the Warren, about the fierce, all-consuming love she had for her granddaughter. He saw in her a strength and dignity that humbled him. She wasn't intimidated by his wealth. She was, in her own quiet way, assessing him, judging whether he was worthy of the trust Alara had placed in him. One evening, as they were sitting in the living room, the city lights twinkling below, Sarah turned to him. "You know," she said, "Ellie talked about you sometimes." Julian's head snapped up. "What did she say?" "She said you were the most brilliant man she had ever met," Sarah recalled, "and the loneliest. She said you'd built a fortress to protect yourself from the world, but you'd accidentally locked yourself inside it. She never stopped loving you, Mr. Thorne. She was just trying to find a way to pick the lock." The words were a comfort and a fresh wound all at once. He hadn't been abandoned. He had been worked on. Alara hadn't given up on him. She had simply changed her strategy. She had been trying to build a bridge back to him, and Lily was the final, desperate plank in that bridge. His involvement with Sarah and Lily did not go unnoticed. His business manager, a pragmatic man named Arthur, called him, his voice laced with concern. "Julian, the expenses from the Sterling, the art supply company charges. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Arthur," Julian had replied, a strange calm in his voice. "I'm making a new investment." "Oh, in what company?" "In a child's future," Julian had said, and hung up, leaving Arthur utterly bewildered. But the world outside their quiet sanctuary was not so easily managed. One morning, Julian was reading the business section of the paper when a headline caught his eye. "Thorne subsidiary, Apex Developments, finalizes acquisition of Warren District Block for urban renewal project." He felt the blood drain from his face. He read the article, his heart sinking with every word. Apex Developments was planning to demolish a 2-block section of the Warren to build luxury condominiums. The project was being hailed as a visionary step in revitalizing the city's forgotten neighborhoods. The article mentioned the displacement of a few hundred residents as a necessary, regrettable byproduct of progress, and it named the location. The 2-block section included the tenement building where Sarah and Lily had lived. It included the Haven Soup Kitchen. He remembered the deal now. It had come across his desk months ago, a multi-million-dollar acquisition. He had spent less than 5 minutes on it, seeing only the projected profits, the impressive ROI. He had signed his name and, in doing so, had signed the death warrant for Ilara's secret world. He had approved the very thing that Ilara had been worried about, the very real trouble she had tried to protect the Carters from. The irony was so bitter, so cruel, it almost made him laugh. He was the villain in his own wife's story. The realization hit Julian with the force of a physical impact. He was not just an observer of the injustice in the Warren, he was its architect. His signature, a casual flick of a pen on a document he barely skimmed, was the instrument of destruction for the very community his wife had dedicated herself to saving. The thought was nauseating. He felt a profound, corrosive shame that went deeper than anything he had ever experienced. It was the shame of a man who had everything and understood nothing. He spent the morning in a cold fury, first at himself, then at the system he had so masterfully built. He made a series of calls, his voice clipped and hard. He summoned the CEO of Apex Developments, a slick, ambitious man named Marcus Cole, to his penthouse immediately. He called his legal team, demanding they pull every piece of paperwork related to the Warren project. He was a general preparing for war, but this time the enemy was his own empire. Marcus Cole arrived within the hour, exuding an aura of smug confidence. He was a product of Julian's own making, ruthless, efficient, and utterly focused on the bottom line. He strode into the living room, a portfolio of architectural renderings under his arm, a wide smile on his face. "Julian, I was thrilled when I got your call. I was just about to send you the final designs for the Thorn Gateway. A fitting monument to your vision, don't you think?" He unrolled a rendering on the coffee table. It depicted a series of gleaming glass and steel towers, sterile and anonymous, where the crumbling brick tenements of the Warren currently stood. Little computer-generated figures strolled along pristine sidewalks, laughing and drinking lattes. There was no sign of the life that was being erased. Julian didn't even glance at it. He stood by the window, his back to Marcus, looking down at the city. "The project is canceled," he said, his voice quiet but absolute. Marcus's smile froze. He let out a short, nervous laugh. "Very funny, Julian. For a second there, I thought you were serious." "I've never been more serious in my life," Julian said, turning to face him. His eyes were like chips of ice. "You will halt all proceedings, terminate the contracts, issue a public statement. The Thorn Gateway will not be built." Marcus stared at him, his face a mixture of disbelief and panic. "Julian, what are you talking about? We've invested millions already. The demolition permits are approved. We're scheduled to break ground in 2 weeks. This is the flagship project for the quarter. The board will have my head. They'll have your head." "Let them try," Julian said, his voice dangerously low. "The board answers to me. And right now, I'm telling you the deal is dead." "But why?" Marcus sputtered, gesturing wildly at the renderings. "This is a gold mine. It's progress. We're cleaning up a blighted area of the city." "You're not cleaning up anything," Julian retorted, his voice rising with a passion that surprised even himself. "You're sanitizing it. You're destroying a community. You're bulldozing people's homes, their lives, their histories, so you can sell glass boxes to people who don't need them. You're calling it progress, but it's just Greed with a better marketing team. Marcus was speechless. He had never seen this side of Julian Thorne. The man he knew was a cold-blooded capitalist who spoke the language of profit, not people. This was a stranger. "This is about the Haven, isn't it?" Julian continued, pacing the room like a caged tiger. "The community soup kitchen on Elm Street. Is that included in the demolition zone?" Marcus, flustered, consulted his notes. Yes, it is. But it's a non-issue. It's a dingy little place. We've offered them a relocation package, a pittance to move their operations." "A pittance," Julian repeated, the words tasting like poison. "Did you know that my wife used to volunteer there?" Marcus's jaw dropped. "Ilara? No, I had no idea. Julian, if I had known—" "That's the point, Marcus. You didn't know. I didn't know. We sign papers, we move capital, we talk about blighted areas and urban renewal, and we never once stop to think about the human beings who live in those areas. We treat them like termites in a building we want to tear down." He stopped pacing and stood directly in front of Marcus, his presence overwhelming. "This isn't just about stopping a project anymore. This is about undoing a wrong that I'm responsible for." He walked over to his desk and pulled out a checkbook. "You will calculate the total financial loss from the cancellation of this project, every last cent. And you will send me the bill. I will cover it personally. Then you will draft a new proposal, not for condominiums, for a community renewal project. I want the Haven not just saved, but expanded. I want a new building, a state-of-the-art facility. I want a free arts center for the children of the Warren. I want affordable housing units built with dignity. I want a park. You will work with the community leaders, the residents, the people who actually live there. You will ask them what they need, and then you will give it to them. And the budget," he said, looking Marcus dead in the eye, "is unlimited." Marcus Cole looked as though he might faint. He was a shark who had just been told to become a dolphin. The transition was conceptually impossible for him. He simply nodded, gathered his useless renderings, and stumbled out of the apartment, his world turned upside down. After he left, Julian sank into a chair, the adrenaline draining out of him, leaving him exhausted but clean. He felt as if he had just performed a long-overdue exorcism on his own soul. For the first time, he wasn't just reacting to Ilara's legacy. He was actively shaping it, wielding his power and wealth, not as a tool of acquisition, but as a tool of restoration. Later that day, he found Lily in her studio, putting the finishing touches on a new drawing. It was a picture of a large, sturdy-looking building. Children were running in and out of the doors, some carrying paintbrushes, others musical instruments. Above the door, in bright, colorful letters, she had written, "Ellie's Place." He knelt beside her, his heart aching with a bittersweet mixture of sorrow and pride. "It's beautiful, Lily," he said softly. "What is it?" "It's the school Ellie was going to build," she said, not looking up from her work. "She told me all about it. A place where kids like me could go after school, where it was safe, where we could make beautiful things." She said it was her biggest dream, a dream he had almost bulldozed. "She showed me pictures she drew of it," Lily continued, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. It was a simple, almost childlike sketch of a building, clearly drawn by an adult trying to capture a concept. It was Ilara's handwriting at the bottom. The Haven Arts Center. "I think," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion, "we should build it, Lily. Just like this. We'll call it Ellie's Place." Lily finally looked up at him, her cerulean blue eyes shining. "Really?" "Really," he confirmed. "It's the least I can do." In the weeks that followed, Julian became a man transformed. He was a whirlwind of activity, but it was a different kind of energy. It was focused, purposeful, and deeply personal. He established the Ilara Thorne Foundation, not as a tax shelter or a PR move, but as a dynamic, hands-on organization. He hired a team of community organizers, city planners, and social workers, instructing them to make the Warren their sole focus. He met with the residents himself. He sat in dingy community halls and church basements, and for the first time, he listened. He heard their stories of struggle, their fears of displacement, but also their fierce pride and their hopes for the future. He was met with suspicion at first. They saw him as the enemy, the billionaire developer who had almost destroyed them. But his actions began to speak louder than their suspicions. He showed them the plans for the new community center, Lily's drawing hanging right next to the official architectural blueprints. He set up a fund to immediately assist all the families who had received eviction notices, ensuring none of them would be homeless. Sarah Carter often accompanied him to these meetings. Her presence was a quiet endorsement. She had lived the struggle. She knew these people. Her trust in him, hard-won and freely given, helped to bridge the chasm between their worlds. Julian found that he was happier, more fulfilled than he had been in decades. The complex negotiations with community leaders were more satisfying than any corporate merger. The challenge of designing a playground that was both safe and imaginative was more engaging than maximizing shareholder value. He was using his intellect, his resources, his power, for something that mattered, something that would last, something that Ilara would have been proud of. One afternoon, he took Lily back to the Warren. The demolition crews had been replaced by construction crews. The air was filled not with the sound of destruction, but with the sounds of creation, the whine of saws, the clang of hammers, the shouts of workers. They stood in front of what used to be the Haven. A new foundation had been laid, and the steel skeleton of a new, much larger building was beginning to rise. A large sign stood out front. It read, "Future home of the Ilara Thorne Community Arts Center, Ellie's Place." Lily squeezed his hand, her eyes wide with wonder. She would have loved this, she whispered. Yes, Julian said, his gaze on the rising structure. She would have. He was no longer living on a different mountain. He had come down into the valley. He was finally seeing the world his wife had tried so desperately to show him. The view from down here, he realized, was infinitely better. The construction of Ellie's Place became the central axis around which Julian's new life revolved. He was on site almost daily, swapping his tailored suits for jeans and a hard hat. He learned the names of the foremen, the electricians, the plumbers. He wasn't just funding the project. He was part of it. His energy and focus a driving force that pushed the work forward with remarkable speed. He discovered a surprising aptitude for it, a satisfaction in watching something tangible and good rise from the ground. It was the inverse of his corporate life, which had been about abstract figures on a screen. This was about bricks and mortar, about creating a space for hope. Lily was his co-pilot in this endeavor. She became the project's unofficial art director. Armed with a sketchbook and a fierce sense of purpose, she would tour the site with Julian, offering her solemn opinions. "The windows in the library need to be bigger so you can see the sky when you're reading," she'd declare. "The painting room needs a messy sink, a really big one." And Julian would listen, turning to the architect and saying, "You heard her, bigger windows, messy sink." The architect, a renowned professional who had designed museums and concert halls, quickly learned that the 7-year-old with paint on her jeans was the true client. The relationship between Julian and the Carters deepened, evolving from one of benefactor and recipients into a genuine, if unconventional, family. Sarah became the quiet, steady anchor of their lives. She had a no-nonsense wisdom that Julian found himself relying on. She would listen to his plans for the foundation, nodding and offering quiet insights that cut through the corporate jargon and got to the heart of the matter. She brought a sense of normalcy and warmth to the sterile penthouse, filling it with the smells of baking and the sound of her gentle humming. She was the grandmother Lily needed, and without realizing it, The maternal presence Julian had been missing his entire adult life. And Lily. Lily was the center of his universe. She was a constant source of wonder, a living, breathing reminder of what was truly important. She retaught him how to play, how to be silly, how to find joy in the smallest things. The way the light hit a dust mote in the air, the taste of raindrops on your tongue, the sheer delight of a perfectly told knock-knock joke. He was healing, and he knew it. The hard, brittle shell he had built around himself was gone, replaced by something softer, more resilient. He started smiling again, genuine smiles that reached his eyes. The haunted look that had shadowed him for 2 years was finally receding. One day, Julian found a box of old home videos while cleaning out a storage closet. He set up the projector in the living room, and the three of them, Julian, Sarah, and Lily, settled onto the couch to watch. The flickering images that filled the screen were from another lifetime. A young Julian, his hair longer, his face unlined, laughing as he chased Ilara on a beach. Ilara, her face radiant with joy, dancing in the kitchen while she cooked. Their wedding, their travels, the quiet, intimate moments of a life shared. For Julian, it was painful, but it was a clean pain, a nostalgic ache rather than a raw wound. He was able to watch her, to hear her voice and feel not just the loss but the profound gratitude for the time they'd had. He glanced at Lily. She was watching the screen, utterly transfixed. When a clip of Ilara laughing, her head thrown back in pure, uninhibited delight, came on, Lily whispered, "That's her real laugh. She used that one when my lion drawing made her snort." Sarah put an arm around her, her own eyes glistening. In that shared moment of memory and love, the lines between past and present, between the family that was and the family that had become, blurred and dissolved. The Ilara on the screen was not a ghost haunting them, but a warm, benevolent presence binding them together. As the project neared completion, Julian knew there was one final step he needed to take. He sat down with Sarah one evening after Lily had gone to bed. He had legal documents spread out on the coffee table. His hands, usually so steady, were trembling slightly. "Sarah," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I've been thinking about the future, about Lily's future." "She's a special girl," Sarah said, her gaze soft. "She's going to do amazing things." "Yes, she is," Julian agreed. "And I want to ensure she has every opportunity to do so. I want to give her the stability and the resources she deserves. But more than that, I love her, Sarah. I love her as if she were my own." He pushed the documents across the table. "I've spoken with my lawyers. I want to formally adopt Lily. I want her to be my daughter." He rushed on, afraid of her reaction. "You would, of course, always be her grandmother. Nothing would change that. You would live with us, here, or anywhere you wanted. You would be an essential part of her life, of our lives. This isn't about replacing you. It's about completing our family. It's what Ilara would have wanted." Sarah looked at the documents, then back at Julian. Tears were streaming down her weathered cheeks, but she was smiling. "Mr. Thorne." "Julian," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "from the moment you knelt on my dirty floor and looked at my granddaughter with such kindness, I knew. I knew Ellie had sent her to the right man. There is nothing in this world I want more than for Lily to have a father like you." The relief that washed over Julian was so immense, it almost brought him to his knees. The opening of the Ilara Thorne Community Arts Center was a major city event. The media was there in full force, drawn by the story of the billionaire who had canceled a lucrative development to build a community center instead. The mayor gave a speech, praising Julian's philanthropy and vision. Community leaders spoke, their voices filled with gratitude and hope. But the real star of the day was the building itself. It was magnificent. It was a structure of light and glass and warm wood, filled with art studios, a music room, a library, a dance studio, and a state-of-the-art kitchen and dining hall that would be the new home of the Haven. The walls were covered with art created by the children of the Warren in workshops held over the past few months. It was a place that buzzed with life and creativity before it had even officially opened. Julian was the last to speak. He stood at the podium, not in a suit, but in a simple sweater and slacks. He looked out at the crowd, at the faces of the people from the Warren, at his corporate colleagues who looked on in stunned admiration, at Sarah, who was beaming with pride, and at Lily, who was standing in the front row holding his hand. He didn't use notes. He spoke from the heart. 2 years ago, he began, his voice clear and steady, I lost my wife, Ilara. And in many ways, I lost myself. I lived in a world of glass and steel, a world of numbers and profits. It was a fortress, and I was its lonely prisoner. I thought I had everything, but I had nothing of value. He paused, his gaze finding Lily's. And then, a little girl walked into my office. She was on a mission from my wife. She brought with her a tarnished locket and a message. She led me back to a world I had forgotten, a world of community, of compassion, of art, of love. She showed me my wife's true legacy. It wasn't in the buildings that bear our name, but in the lives she touched. This center, he continued, gesturing to the building behind him, is not my gift to this community. It is this community's gift to me. It is a tribute to a woman who believed in the power of art to heal, the power of kindness to transform, and the simple truth that love, in its many forms, is the only investment that yields an infinite return. He stepped away from the podium, the applause thundering around him, but he barely heard it. He knelt down in front of Lily. "What do you think, sweetheart?" he asked. Lily looked up at the building, at the name emblazoned above the door. Then she looked at him, her cerulean blue eyes, the same color as Ellie's favorite paint, filled with a wisdom far beyond her years. "I think," she said, a bright, beautiful smile spreading across her face, "that Mommy would be very proud of you, Daddy." She threw her arms around his neck and Julian hugged her back, burying his face in her soft blonde hair. The cameras flashed, capturing the image of the billionaire and the little girl. But Julian didn't notice. He was no longer Julian Thorne, the titan of industry. He was just a father, holding his daughter, his heart full, his soul finally, blessedly, at peace. He was home,